Good morning. Good morning. So I would like to greet everyone. My name is Nomveliso Mbanga. I am coming back to do the formal conversations, mainly because I've been running away from them. I've been running away from them because I do sometimes doubt my involvement in these conversations. So once in a while, I get gripped by that doubt, and then I let things go. And then sometimes I decide to go to, you know what, if not me, then who? So I'm back because I'm reminded of a conversation I was having with the boys at the Teen Boys Camp. And I just want to check my platforms quickly just to see if everything is showing properly. And then I'm going to start. I really want to do a shout out to Ransu Mino for creating my music, my intro music. I've been running away from copyright. So I requested that I created music that I can use for this because I love music. Anyway, so I'm not going to be long. Because this is the kind of conversation I prefer having in in-person sessions for various reasons. One of the reasons is that sometimes social media has this way where people just love debating for the sake of it. And also sometimes people misinterpret something that's said or written on Facebook, and then they run with their own conclusions, often very flawed, and often no one is willing to back down, even me, in terms of being attached to what I've said. I get to the point where I say, I've said what I said, which is not great for these type of conversations. So, mental illnesses or mental health, because those are two different things, are the reasons why I created these conversations for men. Because I understand the need for these conversations around awareness and hopefully the acting up on the awareness that people receive. At the boys' camp, we discussed a bit about mental health, and we also discussed a bit about mental illnesses, especially those that run within families. So in this conversation, this is directed towards men, and I'm going to use that approach. It doesn't shut off other individuals. I'm just purely focusing on the boy child and the men in this conversation. And I'm going to try and make it as short as possible because ideally I would like to expand on this conversation in person. This also means that I will not say everything that needs to be said in this conversation, and I will just do snippets, which might be misconstrued, but that's okay. It's a start to a particular conversation that I'd love to have long term. So this morning I want to talk about the the family genetic or family genetics in the space of mental health and mental illnesses. In the boys' camp, we were talking about weed. We were talking about drugs, substances, and we were talking about alcohol. And we were talking about this conversation in relation to things that can offset or trigger mental illnesses. So the context of the conversation was things that could trigger mental illnesses. And I think most of us are now aware of what the term trigger means. We are aware. If you're not, please make time to just understand what trigger means. In a short summary, in the mental illness space, a trigger that offsets a mental illnesses could be a particular act or particular thing that happens or a particular substance that one uses that then triggers or unlocks a mental illness that might be running genetically, or is it hereditary? Within the English is running away from me, but ehleli ikhona in the linehood and in the bloodline of a particular person. And one of those is one of the triggers of a mental illnesses is weed, specifically for boys who are twins or if the twin gene runs within your family. My conversation with the twin boys was that if you have a twin genetic in your family, if those who know English, please don't judge my English. But if there's a bloodline, if igazi lakho liqondene lihlangene lidibene namawele efamilini yakho, my conversation with teen boys was stay away from wheat. Stay away from wheat, because in that bloodline, inclusive of the twin genetic, it does offset a mental illness in some individual, in fact, most. And this is something that I see a lot in my teen space because teenagers love exploring weed. They love exploring weed. The other conversation about weed is that it might work fine in one young person where they can smoke and not be affected, but another young person who has certain bloodline links to them could start weed and they would not be okay. In some of these individuals, even one spiff or one weekend of smoking could trigger a mental illness. Once a mental illness is triggered, it's like what amaXhosa say, uqhawuka cassette. One of the things that was very common in our days about a cassette is that a cassette is a very thin, what is it called? A cassette has this thin plastic thing inside where the music and the pattern of the music runs through. So in our days, if a cassette you could try and mend it with the sellotape, but the way the music plays is not the same again. In fact, there's a high chance that while you've mended it with sellotape, that part up with so corner the music play properly, it's gonna jump and do stuff. Or while the cassette runs, where you put the fixer, it might break again. That's the thing about mental illnesses, is that once that trigger happens, and once that trigger that offsets a mental illness happen, you now would have to live with a way of managing that illness for the longest time, because of various reasons that I'm not going to discuss in this topic as yet. So my conversation to teens, and this is a conversation that I'd love men to have, because I doubt these are conversations that are often had in the space, in the teen space. We know that, based on the work that I do, that there are certain family genetics, family histories, where your bloodline should not go anywhere near substances, inclusive of alcohol, inclusive of strong substances like weed and drugs. Your bloodline, once it touches those things, it offsets different behaviors. My family is one, and I'm willing to put my blood out to be chopped by my family members, but it's okay. My family bloodline, was warned by our great grandfather that men in my family must stay away from alcohol. Men in my family were warned about this. Bayayazi nabo. Because in my bloodline, alcohol offsets certain things, inclusive of mental illnesses. It offsets, it triggers certain things inclusive of mental illnesses. And as such, the way that I'm going to raise my boy, because he carries my bloodline, would be with that fact in place, and saying that because of the family that you're coming from, these are the things that you must stay away from. The other thing that it's the alcohol, and then also families that have your healing genetics, your African spiritual healing components in your family. You must stay away from certain drugs and substances, because those things are going to offset certain things that you might not be ready for or open to, and you're not being ready about it could offset certain things. So in a post yesterday, I mentioned that men, more so these days, you must be aware about your mental health. I didn't necessarily say everyone is going to be prone for mental illnesses. I was just saying be mindful of your mental health. More so, if you don't understand or know your family history, be mindful of your mental health and what you feed your mental space with, inclusive of what you feed your body with, because these two could offset a mental illnesses if you don't know anything else in between in terms of your management of who you are as a person. Sometimes, in relation to mental health versus mental illnesses, certain behaviors could offset. It's almost like you start weed today or you start alcohol today. You get into it because South Africans, they binge drink a lot. You get into a binge drinking spree to a certain extent, but then you're not aware that your bloodline is prone to addiction. Your bloodline might be prone to addiction. So you're having fun and binge drinking and because your friends are doing so, but your bloodline might not be prone to it. And then what then happens, the excessive presence of the substance within your bloodline can offset things that you might not be ready to deal with. I think that's all that I want to say. I think that's all that I want to say. I do this conversation much more deeply in person, because there are certain things that I know, that I can ask, that I can probe, that I can interact with within this space, that helps me to say when you should stay away. At camp, it was more easy for me because I could interact with the teens directly, and also I had knowledge from their parents, where it was easy for me to say, because of your family makeup and your family type of flow and vibe and history and elements in your family, you should stay away from weed because of these things. And the nice thing about this conversation is that most of the time people know. When I say it, people know. You know very well how alcohol lands in your system. You know very well. There are families who have young men abaqale kakuhle in terms of their career and their development, abaqale kakuhle, and then baqala utywala, and then they fall apart. Often people say, abaloyi bathakathiwe, da 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 da, and all of that drama. I'm not going to get into that space. But sometimes let's check the bloodline. Is your bloodline open to you exploring certain things? Are you allowed in your bloodline? Does your bloodline allow you to explore certain things? Then the question is going to come is, what if I don't know my family's history? I think I will respond to that question when I see you guys in person in the parenting teen sessions that are coming up. Let me just check comments and then I'm going to leave. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah. Also, what I found quite interesting each time the mental health and, because those are two things, the mental illnesses conversations I had, I find that with social media, people are happy to talk about them having a mental illness or mental health issues, but people seldom focus on what they need to do in order to manage their lives in a particular way. And I find for me that's where the crux of the conversations should go. We talk about it, and then you must then do something in relation to that to make sure that you are okay and able to function, because you can have a mental illness and you can still function optimally, but you need to manage your life in a particular way. I'm going to exit, and I'm going to see you guys again in the next conversations from me. Thank you for following. I want to see if there are any questions before I go. So in closing, in the parenting teens roadshow and sessions, I know I will dwell more deeply in family dynamics, because it forms a core of how we raise our kids, plus the things that our kids witness within our families and how it plays out in terms of how they grow. So I know for a fact that I'll be a lot in that space. And I'm hoping that parents will be open to those type of conversations. Also, I will touch more on the emotional intelligence that is needed as a parent when you're parenting a teen these days. Thank you so much for following the page. I'll check your comments and I will respond later.